Overworld spawns have destroyed reliable methods of Pokemon Nuzlocke since their introduction in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. In a Nuzlocke, you're generally only allowed to catch one Pokemon per route, and it has to be the first encounter upon entering. Since the original Nuzlocke was played in Pokemon Ruby, the player's first encounter was randomized based on the game's wild encounter system. But what is your first encounter when the franchise has shifted from random encounters to overworld spawns? How do you randomize this process to stay as true as possible to the original rule set? We have tools to simulate randomness. YouTubers and Twitch streamers use them all the time to subject themselves to things that, in the typical workplace, would easily classify as OSHA violations. The roulette wheel, a simulation of randomness dated as far back as the prehistoric era and beginning of American TV game show Wheel of Fortune. With this, I could single-handedly save Pokemon Nuzlockes from their similar extinction. There was only one other problem. I wanted to test this theory on a game that would pose the most difficulty, that would really test the limits of how far this idea could go. And also because it was the newest game and I needed to make some sort of relevant content. Pokemon Violet. Similar to Legends Arceus, this game is entirely open world and doesn't have routes, but rather areas. After hours of painstakingly cross-examining data on Cerebi with my own finds, I built out my own Excel sheet documenting which Pokemon spawned in which locations. Here's the rule set for my run. I can only capture my first encounter per area, which is determined by the wheel, upon entering a new location. If I accidentally run into a Pokemon on the way to my encounter, I have to use that mon instead, unless it's a duplicate. The only exceptions to the encounter rule are the Dupes Clause and the Shiny Clause. If I encounter a duplicate Pokemon from the same evolution line, I'll opt to re-roll the wheel for variety's sake. But due to the abundance of shiny Pokemon I've seen other people get in this game, I'm making an adjustment to the Shiny Clause. I can catch whatever shiny Pokemon I find during my run, but I can only use the first one I find, if any, on my team, even if I already used up my encounters in that area it was found. I can't use Terror Raids and I can't use any gifted or in-game trade Pokemon. I have to nickname every Pokemon caught. If any of my Pokemon faint, they're to be placed in the DED box and released at the end of the run. If I black out, the run ends, even if I have Pokemon left over in the box. Otherwise, the run ends when I become the champion. And to ensure that I complete the entirety of the game, all other questlines must be completed prior to facing the Pokemon League. To kick things off, I'd spin for my starter Pokemon. I like Sprigatito and Fuecoco, so I really only had a 1/3 chance of being disappointed. Nemona doesn't know anything about type matchups, so the first rival battle was a breeze. Since this game forces your first wild encounter, I decided not to count it unless the wheel chose Lechonk as my catch. Naming my Scatterbug after Star Butterfly, I realized I was starting a pattern with my naming schemes. The next area was a little detour through Inlet Grotto, which as far as I could tell only offered 3 more possible encounters. I grabbed Rufus, the naked roll rat, and introduced myself to Arven at the lighthouse. After entering South Province Area 1, Lady Luck proved once again that she has something against me. As far as I can tell, Happiny can pretty much spawn anywhere, but is pretty uncommon. I noticed that I could Thanos snap Pokemon out of existence by running in and out of Lost Plateaus to force new encounters, so I tried doing that in 3 different spots for a while.
Life, death, life, death!
Patrick!
I went out of my way to check out the top of a nearby hill, and wouldn't you know it, on my way back, my encounter was waiting for me. Chansey is a pretty bulky Pokemon with lots of healing, so I slightly deviated from the cartoon names by referencing the anime classic Naruto. For my run, I wanted to battle as many trainers as possible in each area. Not only would it provide more of a challenge versus wild encounters, but I could get some pretty decent XP and rewards. Skipping through the cutscene hell that is Yuva Academy, it was time I made my first real decision. Where do I go first? Personally, I wanted to head to the east and take on the first Titan Pokemon since my starter was a water type, and I wanted to get Miraidon's power-ups as fast as possible, but after seeing the levels of the first trainer in South 3, I turned tail and went west for the first badge instead. This is where I got myself into my first sticky situation. When you exit the gates of Messagoza, you don't get a title pop-up that tells you what area you're in. I mixed some stuff up in my head and thought I was in West 1 instead of South 2. So when I rolled, despite doubting whether or not Capsicid spawned in that area, I went to go check things out. In the end, I stuck to my guns, owned up to my mistake, and went in for the encounter anyway. I had looked it up to double check if Capsicid could actually spawn in South 2, and when I did, I noticed he evolved via Firestone. I figured Webby would be a good enough match for the little gremlin. which almost cost me. I must have appealed to Lady Luck at some point, because even being over my level and almost full health, I successfully avoided certain death. I went back to the area I was supposed to be in, spun the wheel, and after a bit of searching caught Jimmy Neutron. You know, like a newt. Star took our final form after some trainer battles, and my team was shaping up to actually be pretty well-rounded. I was feeling pretty confident as I took on the first gym challenge of the game. There was a really close call, but I got my first badge and headed back to Cell 3. I rolled LeChonk, but as I went to go grab an item, I was ambushed. Webby evolved during the Bug Gym challenge, so she was able to make quick work of the Rock Titan. What the crap doing? Little did I know, the Titan Pokemon was only a shadow, a puppet of the real threat lurking in the area. A smaller, stronger crab waiting in the wings. This little guy hit like a freight train. A third of my team was weak to rock, and I had just boxed Webby in order to train my new Rookidee. Diglett's ground typing was good for fighting rocks, but he was so frail I didn't feel comfortable switching him in. So I hoped Happiny would be bulky enough to take a neutral hit. She was not. Thankfully, in a last-ditch effort, Star was fast enough to outspeed Cloth and finish it off before it could destroy my entire run. After saying goodbye to Happiny, I entered Artisan and went to take on the next gym challenge. Remember how I said I had issues with Cloth? Sudowoodo is the perfect example of why I love terrestrialization as a mechanic. When you terrestrialize, your typing changes to your new Terra type. In this case, water attacks that would normally be super effective against Sudowoodo are now not very effective because he's changed from a rock type to a grass type. Simultaneously, a Pokemon will keep its same type attack bonus, or stab, to rock moves based on its original typing, but also gain a power boost to moves of its new typing as well. Meaning I can't use Webby or Rufus because they're both weak to grass, I can't use Star or Darkwing because they're weak to rock, and sending out Neutron or Pepper Ann is useless because they can't do anything against Sudowoodo's natural bulk. I'm completely checked. Additionally, Sudowoodo's grass type move in this situation has an additional effect. Every time it uses the move, its speed is increased by 1 stage. So not only do I not have any answers for this Pokemon, but allowing it to hit me with a grass attack makes it faster, meaning I lose any kind of advantage I might have by outspeeding it. I wanted to switch in Star to terrestrialize her and decrease her 4 times weakness to rock down to just 2 times in hopes that she could use her increased bug attacks to take the win. Sudowoodo had just used Trailblaze against Corvisquire, so I was hoping the AI wouldn't switch up its attacks to KO her. I was wrong. Sudowoodo had already gotten 1 speed boost off, but I still continued to risk it all and send in Webby to wing attack and finish it off. Just past Artisan, I was able to spin for another encounter in East Province Area 1. Once I bagged Mufasa the Litleo, I started making my way through West 1. That's when I was thrown another curveball. By making my way down to the last stretch of road, I was able to pick up another checkpoint to fly back to and obtain the Clear Amulet. Once I had the checkpoint at the Pokemon Center, I flew back to East 1 where I did some extra training and discovered something very helpful. Just down the road is the Fire-type Team Star base, and they've blocked off the road ahead to prevent you from going to East 2. However, when I went back to pick up an item next to the river, I realized with a dash jump combo, I could clear this no problem. With this next area available to me, I rolled my next encounter, and I was very excited to add Mimikyu to my team, appropriately nicknamed after Danny Phantom. I also happened to find a Firestone here, so it was time to evolve Pepper Ann into Scovaliant. After losing Diglett and Vivillon, I needed to do some training, and with Danny I was able to comfortably grind against Tauros for XP. Once I was prepped and ready to continue my journey, it was time to go back over to West 1 and take on my first Team Star leader, Giacomo. As a fairy type, Danny was able to give me a clean win against my opponent. I then made my way down to Cascarafa and exited the north gate to Acido Desert. As divined by the wheel, I picked up my new bug, Shino the Relor. I did some backtracking and flew back over to the next Titan, which was absolutely smashed by Danny. It was at this point that I remembered something. I had skipped over 2 possible encounters. South 4 and 5 were still open. I added Bochi the Toxel to the roster, and I was about to roll my next encounter for South 5, but just as I had got there, I decided since this was my encounter, I didn't need to impose the shiny clause, and I could leave that up to use on another shiny if I found one. So I added Static Shock to my team and trained him up for a bit before crossing the map again to my next encounter in West 2. I couldn't think of a hero name for Palafin, so I just defaulted to Zabuza and continued down to the market in Porto Marinada. Now, I should have realized by this point that my opponent's level was a bit high for my third gym, but between Pepper Ann and Static Shock, I felt I had a good enough type advantage and charged headstrong into my next... Nimona. And charged headstrong into my next big fight. I had the advantage, but one blunder cost me way too much. Instead of terastallizing, I let Skovalian take a neutral water attack, which absolutely crushed her. I could have thrown out Static Shock, but unsure if he could one-shot or outspeed at this point, I was too afraid of losing my shiny, so I hoped Danny could take care of it. Danny's grass move I had taught him wasn't strong enough at this point to finish my opponent, and with his disguise already broken, I lost him too. I buried the dead, added 2 more members to my team, and flew back to the east. Static Shock evolved, and I passed through Levincia to spin for an encounter in East 2, hoping for a ground type. I put off my next gym and went to take down Mela, the fire team star boss, who Webby handled fairly easily. With much lower levels than my previous objectives, Iona was a piece of cake, and I showed her whose Shinx evolution was better. Remembering I now had the ability to swim, it was time to hit up a couple more locations for encounters, the east, south, and west seas of Paldea. Adding Penny the Pinchurin, Jet the Buizel, and Michelle the Shelder to my roster, I didn't want to hit the North Sea just yet as I was afraid I wasn't a high enough level yet. Once I had my encounters, I cut back through Levincia and started making my way back through East Province Area 3. Still fresh in a new recording session, I was already a little too confident. Underestimating my opponent and trying to use Webby's wing attack in a bad matchup immediately humbled me. And since her next Pokemon Donphan for some reason knew Thunderfang, I had to switch out Darkwing. Problem, half of my team is weak to ground. I sacked Bochi and used Finizen's Charm to lower its attack as much as possible. We made it out of the fight with only 2 losses, but 1 crit could have easily ended the run there. After healing, I laid my Pokemon to rest and subbed in Relor and Shelder before clearing the rest of East 3. It was time to challenge the Steel Titan, Earthworm. During the first stage, it didn't do hardly any damage, and Static Shock's Fire Fang took it down. The second stage was much of the same, but Arven's Toedscool tanked all of the hits for me. Melting my heart with another Mobastiff cutscene and granting Miraidon an extra boost to his jump, I continued into Tagtree Thicket. Unfortunately for me, the last thing I needed was another Water-type Pokemon. I boxed Misty the Psyduck and charged forward into my next challenge, the Poison Team Star leader, Atticus. I don't think I should have challenged him at this point. With 4 Pokemon all around my team's level, I was doomed. The constant poison didn't help. I lost Finizen, Cloyster, misclicked a Hyper Potion, and then lost Relor and Litleo. The only reason I came out of this fight alive is because of Static Shock and his Intimidate ability. With 4 more deaths, I was able to crawl out of another bad situation and keep the Nuzlocke going.
What did it cost?
Everything.
The tricky part was figuring out who was going to step up in my time of need. Tadbulb and Pinchurin were both electric types, and Rufflet was a flying, both of which I already had. Between Psyduck and Buizel, I knew I needed to add Buizel as my next water type, and decided to leave the team as a party of 3 to maximize the amount of experience Jet would gain. And with that, I flew back over to West 2 and battled my way over to the next city, Medali. I was careful not to get any encounters between Medali and West 3, so now it was time to see what other Pokemon would join me on my adventure. Another uncommon spawn, but if I could get it, it would make a great addition to my team. To help with this search, I found a dish in the Go for Broke grill that would boost my dragon spawns, which worked flawlessly. In a sort of ironic train of thought, I named my apple Ichigo, the protagonist of Bleach, but also means strawberry in Japanese. Lucky for me, when I was running around Tagtree Thicket earlier, I had picked up a sweet apple, the exact item I needed to evolve my Applin into my favorite of his 2 possible evolutions. Tropius also spawned in this area, so after a little bit of training, Corvusquire was ready to evolve as well. I just suffered a massive loss against Atticus, but now I felt like I had a solid foothold and could come back ready to fight. The next gym was normal type, and though I didn't have anything especially strong against it, I wasn't afraid of it either. Static Shock was still able to carry while intimidating all of his opponents. Darkwing was now part steel, so he resisted normal type attacks, and Ichigo was able to do decent damage while also sustaining his own health. All the while, Jet collected more levels in the background. Larry's first two Pokemon weren't much trouble, but I still used Luxray's Intimidate Volt Switch combo to secure my win and give Weasel enough experience to evolve after the match. With my 5th badge under my belt, it was time to face off against Nimona under the top champion's supervision. There were a couple hiccups at the start, but everything was going fine until I Volt Switched out into Darkwing. Torch Song is Skeledurge's signature move, a powerful fire attack that boosts its special attack every time it's used. Under-leveled at this point, I swapped Floatzel in to get one shot and safely transition into another Pokemon, but surprisingly, he lived. That's when I came up with a genius plan. Soak changes your target into water type. By hitting Nimona's starter with Soak, I could decrease the damage from its fire attacks and make it weak to Appleton and Static Shock. Yeah, apparently that just doesn't work on terrestrialized Pokemon. I had no idea. Now with a +3 to Skeledurge's special attack, it was up to Static Shock to either one-shot, paralyze, or flinch for the win. It was over. Even a +2 to Ichigo's special defense couldn't save him from this onslaught. The only thing I could hope for at this point was a crit, but alas, it even literally started raining on my parade. The run was over, and as I started releasing all the Pokemon that helped me throughout my journey, I could only think of the mistakes I had made. All the choices that I could have done differently. If I had just been a little more prepared, this Nuzlocke wouldn't be over. Some of these Pokemon wouldn't have to be released. And when it came down to my last companion, Static Shock, I just couldn't do it. Can you blame me? Who in the world would release a shiny Luxray? So yeah, I'm keeping him, and he'll always have a special place in my heart. And you know, I may have lost this Nuzlocke challenge, but it isn't all bad. I still accomplished one goal. I proved that it's possible to run a successful Nuzlocke in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. The roulette wheel worked, and I may have lost this time, but I assure you, I will beat a Pokemon Violet Nuzlocke. Hey everyone, I just wanted to say thank you all for watching the video and for all the support. I've got a couple other videos that I'm working on still, but between that, work, and the holidays, I've been pretty busy. So thank you again and happy holidays. Here's a little blooper from the recording. My opponent's level was a bit high for my 3rd gym, but between Pelipper and